Hey guys, it's Carolyn. Welcome back to the podcast. And today I wanted to take a minute and talk about change orders and what is a change order directive and what does that mean and how you could navigate through a change order directive issue. Okay, so we're talking mostly about commercial subcontracts in the commercial industry when you, as a subcontractor, are signing someone else's contract, normally for a commercial project, right? A general contractor gives you a contract to sign and you review it. And one of the most important parts of a commercial subcontract is the change order provision, just generally, right? What does the change order section say about who can approve change orders? What is the process, right? Being very careful to pay attention to some of the small details in there, like if they send you a request for change order, and you have 3 days to respond with the additional cost. If you don't respond, then you agree that it's not extra work. So, making that, I know that's bitten a couple people in the butt before. So just making sure that you read that provision of the contract, that you're familiar with it, that you get the right person to sign the change order before you do the extra work. That's the thing, guys, is that even if there's a promise that we'll sign it later, get a change order signed before you do the extra work. Otherwise, you're not entitled to be paid because a change order is a modification of the contract, right? And unless it's in writing, it's not going to be effective. So it's got to be in writing, signed by both parties. So now something that I've been seeing in the change order provision is what's called a change order directive. And here's the situation, is that both the subcontractor and the general contractor agree that what they are asking you to do, what the general contractor is asking you to do, is extra work, right? It's outside of the original scope. It's extra work. We agree that it's going to cost some amount of money, right? But we're getting stuck on how much it's going to cost. The subcontractor usually normally provides a price to the general contractor of how much it's going to cost. He doesn't agree to the price, but then the change order directive says you have to do the work anyways, and we'll fight about the price later on, either through mediation or arbitration towards the end of the project. As you can see, that can be very problematic, having to do what everybody agrees is extra work for free until we agree at some later date what the amount of the extra work was worth, right? So that's the change order directive part, is that they're directing you to do the work. They realize it's extra, but we can't agree on a price. You have to do it, and we'll talk about how much you're going to get paid for it later. And here's the thing. If you don't do the extra work under the change order directive, and then you get terminated, technically you're in breach of contract, right? Because the contract says that they're allowed to issue this directive to make you do the work without getting paid. And if you refuse to do it, then you're in breach of contract, right? And just a quick side note, what happens when you're in breach of contract and you get terminated, right? It's not just you walk away from any money that you're owed. Now you're on the hook for whatever it costs the general contractor to replace your scope of work, right? So say your contract is worth $100,000 for your scope of work. We can't agree on this change order price. You get terminated. They replace you, and now for the same scope of work that you were going to do, a subcontractor is charging $150,000, right? So now you're on the hook for the $50,000 over your contract amount. So that is why, if you have this change order directive provision and we don't negotiate it, you can't just not do the work, right? Because then you'll get terminated and you get sued for breach of contract, and it can be expensive and time consuming. So what can we do in this situation? So if your contract has a change order directive provision that says, hey, if we can't agree on price, I'm going to order you to do it and we'll fight about it later. What I recommend is to negotiate that provision. And how we negotiate is we build in a formula for how much this extra work will cost. And this could cover the whole change order provision when you're talking about extra work. So like any extra work is going to be time and material plus 10% for profit and overhead, right? That way the formula is already built in. When we agree it's extra work, here's the change order amount because it's time and material plus 10%. We've already agreed upon it. There's no being ordered to do extra work that's clearly outside your scope and then waiting to get paid until later, until a time when we can go to mediation or arbitration and decide how much this extra work is worth. And the problem with that is multitudes, right? You're doing the extra work without getting paid, and then you have to hire a lawyer to go through mediation or arbitration to decide on an amount that you're going to get paid, and you're not going to get paid for that any of that extra time or extra fees that you're going to have to incur to get there. So usually you'll agree to whatever price they have. So if we build this formula in there, which I think is just good in general for change orders, right? We have a formula. Or, it can be the negotiation is a provision of if we can't agree on the price of the change order, here is the formula: time and material plus 10%. That way it's in there that we can decide on a price, and there's no need for a change order directive, right? So like I said, have it added to the contract as an addendum or added on the side that, hey, if we can't agree on a price, here's the formula, and that will be the cost of the extra work. We'll sign off on it, and then you'll get paid and not have to wait till the end of it. This also brings up a good point that I see a lot, especially in commercial contracts, is that the general contractor asks you to do something. You say it's extra work. They say it's included in your scope, right? And usually there's some back and forth on reading the contract. Is it included? Is it not included? Again, in this situation, if the GC says it's included and you should do the extra work and you don't, then you're terminated. Then again, we'll be in breach of the contract, because under their eyes, you should have done the work that should be included, right? So the best way, from my experience, to handle that situation is to have a very detailed, specific email or request for a change order saying why this work you're being requested to do is not included in your scope of work, why it's extra, and the price and charge that it's worth, right? And submit it as a change order. Obviously, they're not going to sign it. At least you submitted it. And what'll happen is you go on doing the rest of the job, you finish the job or get close to finishing, and then we can go ahead and file a lien for that extra work that you weren't paid for, right? And then, we can have the argument of, was it included? Was it not included? Here's my scope of work. It's not included in here. Here's why it's extra. It's probably best to have a conversation with somebody, an attorney who knows contracts, who knows how things work, before you make this decision internally, because there are a lot of things hidden throughout those numerous pages of contract documents of where scope of work can be described. So, the main thing is to get their side on why they think it's not extra work, and let's respond to that with why it is and why it's not included in, the scope of work we were hired to do. Again, I've talked about scope of work a ton in the commercial contract setting, and that's because when, as a commercial contractor, we put a bid out there, right? We assume that when we get a subcontract back, the scope of work is going to be the same as the bid. And 9 times out of 10, it is not the same. It has something added, plans have been changed, there's something different about it. So before you sign that contract, take the time to look at the scope of work and make sure it matches your bid, right? I tell my clients to look at the scope of work attached to a subcontract as if you were bidding a new project and see if it matches, right, the bid that you did. If it doesn't match, you need to email back and say, hey, this is going to be extra work. Here's my price. If you'll reissue the subcontract with this increased price for this extra work, I'll sign it, right? Don't just sign it, or don't just rely on a change order later on or some provision later on to fix it, because the contract that you sign is the one that's going to be used to interpret the relationship between the parties. And any conversations that were had on what was going to be added or what was going to be done to the contract don't come in as evidence to change the contract, right? So we've got to get it changed in writing. The agreement has got to be correct when we sign it. And that's with anything in the contract, the schedule, anything that's in the contract that's not correct needs to be correct when you sign it, or it could be, used against you at a later date. So again, change order provision, read it. If it has a change order prevention section in there, try to negotiate it. We've been pretty successful at negotiating these change order directive sections with a formula to figure out how much the extra work would cost. So that we've been successful in doing that. So don't just sign it, because if we get into a situation where you you're directed to do the extra work without getting paid, it could be substantial and could really harm your business. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me on social media or email me. I'll be around on this particular topic. I've also just written a blog article that's on the cromeanslawfirm.com where you can learn more about it or reach out to us there. All right, guys, thank you for being listeners to the podcast. I appreciate it.